Hi, I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States.
And this is Gender, a Wider Lens, a podcast dedicated to the shifting concepts around gender in our contemporary culture.
Through in-depth interviews, personal stories, and psychological exploration, we seek to open up the discourse around this hot-button issue.
Join us as we look at gender from a wider lens.
Hi, Stella.
How's it going, Sasha? How are you?
I'm doing really well. How about you?
Good. I thought this episode with Tali was really going to give people an insight into what it's like to be somebody who is completely engaged in gender and gender identity and lots of things that other people, I suppose many listeners to our episode, our podcast wouldn't be used to hearing arguably the other side of the coin. Would that be right?
Yeah. Tali was engaged in, what we would think is some pretty extremist activism around things like gender and race and all kinds of other identity issues. And what's fascinating about her story is that she's married to a woman and she actually got her normie wife, she calls her my normie wife, really into gender identity herself. And her wife started to adopt trans pronoun and a different name and came out and made a really big change in her life. And then right as Tali was starting to have questions about her extreme activism, she realized, oh no, what have I done? And then she had to walk her wife back. So this is a real roller coaster of a story. And it's a great insight into the personality of somebody who's intelligent, opinionated, justice-oriented, and kind of doesn't care what other people think. But that, of course, can be a huge benefit, and it can be a challenge, as you'll hear in Tali's story today.
Yeah, I think Tali, she's definitely somebody that is a very interesting personality and I'd imagine very engaging. And it sounded like her normie wife had gender dysphoria, but it wasn't named and it wasn't given much focus. And then incoming gender identity theory, queer theory, wife who was very swept up in activism. And suddenly it got named, it got identified. The wife was self-identifying as the opposite sex or whatever she was identifying, certainly trans. And then was on the road. And then Tali had an instant where she realized her thinking wasn't in lockstep with the groupthink. Up until a certain point in the story, she was always in lockstep with all the groupthink, whether it was Black Lives Matter, whether it was gender, whatever it was, she was right in the middle of it. And then there came a divergence. And suddenly she didn't agree with the groupthink. And that's what made her start to unravel and start to think and start to kind of back out of the entire concept. So she walks herself back as well as her wife.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, Tali will talk about how her perspective on the Israel-Palestine question is what first opened her eyes to the fact that her peer group, her cohort, her, comrades in arms, were saying things that she really didn't agree with and felt very strongly that they were wrong about. And so we see this happening in a lot of stories of whether it's desistance or detransition or basically leaving behind a belief system. When there's something in the belief system that contradicts something even more strongly believed, even more strongly held, that can be the seed that starts to crack things. And she talks about these 3 pillars starting to crumble, starting with her views on things like racism and anti-racism and this dogmatic view of race, and then feminism, and then last, but certainly not least, was gender. So this will be a really interesting story. Tali talks about the kind of fervor and passion that the student activists had and how things like the APA and Endocrine Society position statements really bolstered them. So you can just imagine these young, intelligent, but maybe a little bit, lacking wisdom activists, how they're just really riled up by all of these institutions backing gender affirming care. So there are so many things that we talk about on the podcast, which come to life in Tali's story today.
And you do get an insight into the kind of the personality of the activist. Arguably, there's some grandiosity. Tali is lovely, talking about it. But in the bonus content as well, she gives some really interesting nuggets of walking back. And she was really quite strategic and very determined. Just a purposeful woman.
Exactly.
Who knows what she's doing. And, it's really, really, really insightful what she's got to offer us.
Yeah, she talks about the two main things that helped break her wife out of the gender identity belief system. So if you want to hear Tali's description of that, you'll have to check out the bonus content. But for now, we'll leave it here with the intro and just allow you guys to enjoy this conversation. Before we dive into the conversation, we want to take a quick moment and thank our sponsors, GenSpect and Therapy First. GenSpect is an international organization committed to fostering a healthy approach to sex and gender. GenSpect will be hosting the Bigger Picture Conference in Lisbon, Portugal this September. To learn more about who will be speaking at the conference and to order your tickets, visit genspect.org.
Therapy First is a non-profit worldwide professional association of mental health providers who view psychotherapy as the appropriate first-line treatment for gender dysphoria. Therapy First supports psychotherapists working with gender dysphoric youth and young adults and offers public education on mental health and psychotherapy. Visit therapyfirst.org to learn more.
Now here's the conversation. Hi, Stella, and welcome to the show, Tali. We're glad to have you.
Hello there. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you. We've had a few people on who've recently kind of name-checked a kind of a politicization that happened around the first Trump presidency. And it seems, if I'm not jumping the gun here, it seems that's kind of where your story starts. Would I be right?
You would be right. In the long, that's right before the first sort of peak in my story. Yes, that is correct.
So tell us a little bit about who you were around that time, maybe a little bit before, and then how did things change around this kind of 2015, 2016 moment?
Certainly. So I grew up, my parents were public school teachers, union workers. We were just Democrats always in my family. Not super progressive. My parents certainly said non-PC things in the home or whatever, but firmly blue, pretty much my whole town. I mean, I'm from New York. And so that was just kind of the atmosphere that I was raised in. In 2015 in college, I actually had I was arrested basically, which was it was a false arrest. There's nothing on my record, blah, blah, blah. But it was a very traumatic experience for me. It was at the end of my college experience. And that experience radicalized me a bit. From after my experience of negative police interaction, basically, I got really into sort of Black Lives Matter, because that was the scene in which people were discussing what I perceived as police brutality and police injustices. So while dealing with my own kind of trauma, I was sort of really constantly re-traumatizing myself, because this was when all of the videos were sort of becoming a thing, right? Every time there's a negative interaction or a dangerous interaction or a deadly interaction, there's a video of it. And so I'm being sort of quickly radicalized, both by the environment around me and by my personal experience. And so my first memories of not my first memories, but a salient memory for me around that time of the Clinton-Trump election was me writing to the Clinton campaign about like the need for criminal justice reform. And I, at that point, I was very anti-Trump, but that wasn't very novel. Like most sort of normal, good people, quote unquote, were very anti-Trump. But I was very obnoxious about it. I was hyper political. I was posting online, you know, like, remember everybody, like if you're voting for Trump, election day is November 28th, like giving the wrong date, you know, just silly things like that. I was very hyper political. I was very much like, only bigots vote for Trump, or people who are so privileged that they don't need to worry about the real life consequences that, you know, a Trump presidency could have on minorities in America. And so
can you tell us around this time a little bit more broadly? Were you dating women at this time? What were you studying in college? Like, in addition to this personal experience you had, which kind of radicalized you around kind of the justice system, what was going on in your life? Who were you? Because my understanding is you were maybe a counselor at some point, and then you got into like a master's program around psychology and left. So tell us a little bit more about who you were at the time, and then we'll continue with your time.
Yeah. So I started my doctoral program in 2017. So basically
right
after, like inauguration time, basically. Okay. But so I had finished my undergraduate degree in psychology. I was coming into dating women, but not openly. I had my first sort of very intense romantic experience with a woman shortly before that, like at the end of my undergraduate career. But it was very complicated. We both had boyfriends who were friends with each other, who were giving us the green light. Like it was a complicated situation. In some ways, I think it was sort of very beautiful because it gave me a very like safe environment to kind of test these things out. But so I was not like out as gay. I wasn't identifying as such, but I've always been an ally, for lack of better terms. And there's almost a joke sometimes within the community, right? The biggest straight allies, you know, end up coming out. And so I think there's some there. Yeah. For my experience. But, really I got more political, in my graduate program. So when I started grad school, my mentor, the head of my lab, was a gay man. My lab mates was a bisexual woman and a genderqueer woman, and suddenly that was everything around me, which was very exciting for me too, because when I moved to Hawaii, I felt like I could I moved to Hawaii. That's where I went to graduate school. I felt like I was a new person. No one had any expectations of me as someone who dates men. And so while I did try dating a few men when I moved to Hawaii, there was nothing there. The biggest way that I kind of remember describing it was like, I didn't have the urge to kiss them. And I think that's a signifier of if you're really into things, right? I would go on these nice dates with guys and I had no urge to kiss them. And then I would go on these dates with women and I would be like, I could not even focus because I was just like, I hope she'll kiss me because I'm too nervous to kiss her. So it was when I was really realizing like, okay, my attraction and desire for women is just a lot stronger than it is for men. And so I was able to, when I moved here, just kind of like start out bisexual. Right. I could immediately jump into the sort of queer groups and clubs on campus. And I did. And coincidentally, like if not a majority, a significant plurality of my cohort of students were all queer in some way. And so this was just kind of in the water. And so my personality from a very young age I've had a bit of issues with authority. Like, I don't like being told what to do without being explained why. You know, I like to really understand things. I have this sort of like strong sense of justice from when I was a child. And so in graduate school, anytime there was a preacher coming onto campus, you know, talking about how gay marriage is a sin or how abortion is murder, I would like abandon all my responsibilities for the day so that I could stand there preaching a counter narrative.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to look at myself in as like, oh wow, what a righteous thing to do, but I can't get away from in hindsight how much there was sort of like a complex around it, you know, like all of these people around, these poor people who are going to hear this and just be broken by this man's words. I need to be here. I must be here to help them.
Like a kind of inflation in hindsight that you realize
totally
that like it's your responsibility to save people from this message, and like you as a 19 or 20-year-old will do it. And I only say this because I'm like, oh wow, that was totally me. I was like yelling at my professors in class, like arguing with them about stuff. And I now realize, wow, that was so arrogant. Oh my God.
Oh, that's me. And, you know, I'm really excited that we're going to talk about some of the grad school stuff and just the dynamics there, because I essentially feel like I need to go on an apology tour. I've been, you know, I frankly, I've written an email in my head many times to my former advisor of just a huge apology. I've never sent it. But yeah, I'm ashamed of a lot of my behavior, frankly. But in the moment, it feels
powerful
and righteous.
Yeah.
Really righteous.
Yeah.
And that was sort of who I was in my group. So I was the New Yorker. And so whenever if we would be out to eat and there was I was the one that it was like the group decided, okay, Tali is going to speak up for us. So whenever we had an issue in a class, I was just always going to be okay, I'll go speak to the chairperson. I'll go speak to the professor. And I liked that role. I did.
You then, I think you met your partner, and it kind of got a lot more serious, that role that you'd already kind of developed, and were kind of, you know, you were kind of like, I was like it myself. I kind of liked that character, the dissident, you know, the contrarian.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But
the radical.
I think it turned.
That's how I saw myself, was the radical. Yeah. It did. So things sort of really came to a head during sort of like the George Floyd protests and stuff like that. This is right when COVID hit too. And so I ended up taking a leave of absence from school and basically protesting almost full time. I had flown back to New York in the summer of 2020 because I felt like, again, this sort of overinflated sense of importance, frankly. I felt like I needed to be on the front lines. Like that's where my body could be of the, and these were the words I was using.
The world needed you.
The world needed me, Stella. The streets of New York City needed me in those protests. And so, but to back it up only slightly, I was very into all the queer stuff. So I eventually totally came into my queer identity. I was only dating women. I had met my wife, who then fiance. And I was I was guest lecturing to undergraduates about gender identity and sexual orientation. And so this was something that I fancied myself an expert on. And frankly, I think a lot of people in my cohort fancied ourselves experts.
Yeah.
Because we were the young ones who knew what was going on, and all of the old heads, you know, kind of needed to step aside. We got to give diversity trainings to the staff, to the professors. Elders. Yeah. And we liked that. We liked that.
That's so good.
And I want to just touch on this for a second because, first of all, I mean, thank you so much for your willingness to come here and share what probably feels like somewhat embarrassing and cringy moments. But, you know, when you are a person of strong conviction who's intelligent and has leadership qualities, obviously we can end up slotting ourselves into these weird positions. And I've certainly been, and I've shared this a little bit on the podcast before, like in more of a kind of activist mindset around certain things that I now don't agree with. But this is so important because when you do hear about these young, ambitious, queer activists and you think, you know, who are they to come in here lecturing teachers and parents and kids? And it's just valuable to kind of understand, like, from the personality side and the cultural environment side, this is how this happens.
Yeah.
And it's so tricky when, you know, kids in a middle school or high school are questioning their gender and they're like, oh, well, there's someone that you can talk to. This so-and-so person from the university is going to come. And they tend to be the most radical of them all because they have that conviction and they're willing to travel halfway across the globe to like share their message. Meanwhile, a more moderate person without the zealotry isn't probably becoming like an advocate for queer students. So it just kind of how it snowballs into this extremism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it really was extremism. And it was all kind of knowing what I know now in hindsight about the way that gender ideology very unscientifically just took hold in all of the American institutions. I didn't know that it was an unscientific process then. I just thought, well, of course, right? Because this is the next thing and these people are being authentic and they do deserve inclusion and all of this. But we, the students, were bolstered by what was happening in the field. When I was in graduate school is when the APA came out with the style guide, including they, them pronouns to be used in the singular. And we were pigs in shit to tell our professors that actually we can use they, them, and theirs to refer to the singular in our papers, because this was a time, right, where many of us, we were trying to use that and we would get corrections back from our supervisors that this is grammatically incorrect. And I mean, we were truly like, suck it. Look, the APA, which you guys tell us we have to follow, is literally saying that this is correct. So we were really...
Wow.
There was a lot feeding this.
Difficult,
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess should I move along now to sort of my life here?
How did this spill into your personal life?
Yeah.
Okay, great. There we go. So everyone in my lab was doing queer research of some sort. My research was focusing on microaggressions against sexual minorities.
That would be right.
Yeah, exactly.
As it would.
Exactly. And which, by the way, when you're looking for microaggressions everywhere, you find them. Yeah. You find them.
It's a storm.
And it's really easy. It's really easy to become extremely anxious and to feel highly persecuted when you are looking for them everywhere. Yeah. Which is something that I do want to touch on later. Maybe I'll make the point very briefly now. There's something so obvious that the psychology field is getting wrong, especially with microaggressions, which is we know that the mechanism responsible for most of the anxiety and depression is rumination. Yeah. How on earth do we think it's productive to tell people to look for slights in what other people are saying? Not even outright offensive statements, but to look for the undertones of oppression and aggression that might be in someone's statement.
It's ignoring everything we've learned in class 1 of psychology. Yeah, it's a farce.
And it's incredible. And it's incredible because, right, we're still learning that. They're still teaching us that. And then in the same breath, we're also being told that microaggressions are this death by 1,000 cuts, cumulative negative effect on someone's mental health. So, there's a disconnect there.
Yeah, and I also want to say it's so nihilistic, because when I went through this, I went through it a little bit somewhat in the race world as like a kind of person from a different background, but also really with feminism. And I went down a kind of a certain type of feminist rabbit hole that created this in me. And what you realize is it causes you to be the least generous in your interpretations of everyone's behavior. And that's so anti-human. It's anti-relationship. It's anti-empathy. It's anti-being able to build bridges across different types of people. And that makes it a really nihilistic viewpoint, which is solipsistic. It makes you super self-focused, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of being standoffish and being suspicious. And like, of course, how are you going to have a genuine human relationship with somebody when you're suspicious of them before they've even like opened their mouth? So I'm just so glad you raised this point, because I think this happens a lot. Any kind of marginalized rabbit hole can cause this effect in people who get too fixated on those perspectives.
Absolutely. And I think you really you hit the nail on the head, which is what I've been trying to bang on about for a couple of years now, since I've changed my mind about almost all of this, basically, is that, it's bad for society when there's no generosity towards other people. And it's really bad for the individual. It is so bad for your mental health to go around thinking that people think less of you, right? It's likely not accurate. I mean, these are cognitive distortions that we are sort of teaching people. We're sort of encouraging cognitive distortion. But it's bad for society, and it's bad for the individual mental health. But so I was studying microaggressions, and you wanted
to pass that along to your lovely wife.
Not exactly. Not exactly.
Okay.
It was actually my friend's research that triggered my wife into coming out as transgender.
Okay.
So I'll give a little background on my wife. My wife is a wonderful normie. She doesn't exist in any of these online spaces. When she and I met and I was like a total queer activist, she could not keep straight. Like, she would have to ask me, is trans woman, does that mean like is that a woman who wants to be a man, or is that the man? Like, she didn't know any of it.
Okay.
So she was a total normie.
Yeah.
And then a close friend of mine, was doing a dissertation on LGBTQ POC, basically like minority stress.
Okay.
And so my friend asked my wife and I to participate because I'm Jewish. And so my friend at least considers me an ethnic minority. And I mean, I do too, but that's for another story. And my wife is Filipino, and we're both gay. So we were asked to pilot this survey that my friend was going to use for their dissertation. And the first question on this questionnaire is like, what is your gender identity? And there's a whole list of options. And my wife, like, kind of freezes, and she's like very overwhelmed by all of the options. And she doesn't know what they mean. So she's asking me, like, what are these? Like, what does this mean? What is non-binary? What is gender fluid? And so I like jump right into action. Like, I know all of these. Yeah, like I lecture the undergrads on this. I was built for this conversation.
All right. You rolled up your sleeve.
Rolled up my sleeves, exactly. And so I go and I give sort of the definitions for all of these things. And then I also, because I just am so knowledgeable and I have all of these queer friends, I also share with my wife what this experience feels like according to people of this experience. So I sort of give her a definition and a little taste of all of these different identities. And
can I ask, how old was your wife at this time? This matters, I think.
Absolutely. So we're in 2024 now. She was 33.
Okay, keep going. Okay.
Yeah, not young.
Not young. And she's had successful relationships with women. She has no gender distress. She can't even keep the labels straight. She's been loved for who she is. presumably as a woman who loves women. And at 33, this series of questions began something.
Right. And now let me correct one thing that you just said. She had gender distress.
She did have gender distress.
She had never talked about it.
Okay.
So this conversation between she and I leads to this sort of emotional breakdown on her end.
Okay.
There's no other way to put it. I mean, it really was it was a mental health crisis, basically. She starts, recounting that, it starts off with like, I was going to take this to my grave. I never planned to tell anybody this. But actually, ever since I was a really young kid, I just felt like I was supposed to be a boy.
Okay.
I really wanted to be a boy. I felt like I was supposed to be a boy. When I was little, I would try to pee standing up. And then we're also kind of putting together some of these adult behaviors, like obviously preference for masculine clothing and stuff like that, but also I knew that she had discomfort with her female body. Like I knew this because we had been in a relationship now, right?
Yeah.
But we were suddenly piecing this together. Real discomfort around the parts of her body that are female, basically, that code you as female. Really uncomfortable with anything that's going to show off her hips, really uncomfortable with anything that's going to like show off her breasts. So we're kind of, she's confessing this to me, and it's tying in now to these things that I knew about her, but didn't categorize as gender distress.
Yeah.
And so, she has this emotional breakdown that like, I think one of these identities is me. She didn't realize really that other people go through that. And so I think part of it was me describing the gender dysphoria experience to her when I was giving my awesome explanation and vignettes of what each of these identities are, that she, I think, felt really seen in a scary way for the first time. So she's having this all, but she's like, but I don't know what to do about it because I wouldn't want to have to tell my family this, like I wouldn't want to make people look at me different. Like that was a very scary prospect to her.
Can I just point out to the listeners, because it's a very interesting point. Ian Hacking wrote about this. He's a philosopher, and he talked about a concept called, semantic contagion. And he basically said by naming a certain type of person, by naming something, we can create a contagion, but there's good and there's bad. He didn't say there's good and there's bad. I'm saying there's good and there's bad, because it's kind of, there's something relieving to kind of, for your partner to kind of say, oh, other people have this. We all know that feeling. And it's such a beautiful kind of feeling, but it can exacerbate things. So in a world which labels and diagnoses all over the place, we're on a precipice. We're on a cliff edge the whole time, because on one level, labeling it gives us a huge sense of relief, but we can drive into it. So it's a deal with the devil in many ways. You know what I mean? I'm very at odds with this whole thing right now. No,
I'm with you, and I've thought a lot about this too in the context of diagnostic labels, right? They're sort of on the one hand necessary in order to bill for insurance and get paid. And on the other hand, a lot of people can over-identify with the diagnostic label. A lot of people, same thing with sort of like support groups. People join support groups for very good reason, right? So that they can relate with other people and share their experiences. And again, I'm not anti-support group. But then there are some people for whom this identity becomes their entire identity. At the expense of maybe other parts of them, other interests, other important things in their life. So there's a lot of power in labeling things. I'm with you there. Good and and not always so good. But so, so my understanding of trans at that time, I was a full believer. Trans people are born in the wrong bodies. And so my wife is telling me this. I'm like, wow. So my wife was born in the wrong body, basically. And even though she's saying to me now, I wouldn't want, I wouldn't want to burden my family with this. There's almost part of me that wishes that I respected that. But the way that I interpreted that was like, that's just sort of your nature,
internalized transphobia too.
Yeah, exactly, right. And like, you deserve to be respected for who you are. And so my feedback was, your family loves you, everyone loves you. They're gonna get behind. They're gonna get in line. They're gonna get with the program, And her parents are not. She doesn't come from like a super conservative or a religious family. Like that threat wasn't real. And, my wife is sort of a more shy, reserved person. She really doesn't like to burden other people in a way that I don't have. I'm not really like that, because I don't always see it as a burden, because to me, I'm like, oh, I would, of course, do that or be there for the person in that other way. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, so I wanted to help liberate her. And so... I was like, I'm going to help you come out, like I can tell some people for you, which to me didn't seem all that strange for a few reasons. When I came out as a lesbian, I had my mom tell a lot of my family members. I had other friends in my program come out as trans. In my clinical psych program come out as trans. And it was just sort of common that people would ask their friends to tell other people for them.
Totally.
Can you tell this professor? Can you? Right. So it was like, I'm going to help my wife and I'm going to tell people her new pronouns. And I'm going to get her binders. And I've got, at that point in time, I had two of my closest friends who were in transition, who were taking HRT, both of them having surgery, a male and a female, both of them going through surgeries. So I had friends with connections into this world. And so I was like, okay, we're going to get some doctors. We're going to get some referrals. We're going to do this thing.
Can I ask Tali, what was the span of time between that questionnaire and then starting to do these things? Are we talking a couple days? Are we talking several months? Are we talking a year? Give us just a overview.
18 hours, maybe.
Oh my God. Okay.
Oh my.
Now,
that's important.
Listen,
I just think that's important.
It is.
Because I want to put people in the mind frame. Like, if you really believe in your heart of hearts that this is a person whose authentic self has been leashed all this time,
there's no exploration
can't come
necessary.
Fast enough, and you have to just hurry. Like, we have to understand, you, with the information you believed at the time, this was the most compassionate thing you could have done. Obviously, you've changed your perspective. But I want people to understand, like, if they have a kid whose best friend is, like, shoving them down the gender pathway, they're not necessarily malicious. They really think this is what's going to free the person to be happy.
Exactly. And that's where, totally, and thank you for highlighting that, because this is something that I've talked about before, but I think it bears repeating. We have a stereotype in our community, in the sort of anti-medicalization, anti-affirmative, gender critical, whatever you want to call this little world that we all exist in. We have this stereotype of like the Munchausens by proxy moms, and that like all of these kids are being pushed into this thing. And what I want people to understand is, I think more often what is happening is an overzealous activisty type person collides with someone who is sincerely distressed.
Yes.
So they're not creating necessarily a problem in someone, but they're very eagerly trying to solve it with the tools that they know. And for my wife, it also, that's the thing too. I'm coming from this clinical psych milieu where my lab especially is kind of focused on like minority stress of LGBTQ people. And I know that the research says that the high incidences of anxiety and depression amongst lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people is because of the adversity that they face in society. Now, I don't believe this anymore, but this is a very commonly held belief.
Yes.
In psychology departments and just in the literature. Even if you're just reading through the literature, this is like what the minority stress model explains. And so my wife had a history of mental health issues, sometimes severe. And so to me, again, it was like, this all made sense. Finally, now we know why she's dealt with this depression and anxiety her whole life. So it couldn't come fast enough. We were gonna make her better. And that's what all of the trans people online say, right? Mm-hmm. The second, oh my gosh, just having the hormones in my body, my mental health improved. Just, that's what they say. They say this did solve all my problems. So right. Like I'm very critical of myself in hindsight. There's huge cringe factor, but really I was doing what I thought was humane and supportive and right for this person who I loved very dearly, who was like in distress talking to me about this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it was very quick. I mean, as in like we discussed all of these things in that conversation, right? And then my wife basically slept for like what felt like at least 24 hours. Wow. Which was a very, indicative of this sort of like depressive, like this was just, this was so much for her.
So much.
Yeah.
So much.
Which again was sort of more evidence that we cracked the code in a way.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we're, telling people about her new pronouns and like her, my wife's name is Kelly. And so she didn't really want to change her name. We just shortened it to Kel, right? That's sort of more gender neutral. Although I guess Kelly really can be a man's name as well. But we're doing it, and I order her binders online. And shortly after her social transition begins, my ideological detransition began.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Lucky for her.
So lucky for her, but this actually caused a lot of internal...
I'm sure.
I was living in a closet now suddenly because I couldn't talk to my wife about what was going on in my brain. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go into about like what started that ideological process for me.
We got to know something. Yeah.
I know.
Tell us.
Don't leave us hanging here.
Okay. So without derailing too much into sort of politics, it basically happened while I was this radical activist, right? I was out at least 3 times a week protesting with the local Black Lives Matter group, with the local Refuse Fascism group. I was like the one with all the signs. Like I would show up and pass out the signs. I was really involved. Oh, wow. This was like totally my personality. I remember also at this time too, my advisor telling me like, basically, maybe you should go do activism full time. And I was so freaking offended by that. So offended, but he was completely right. He was right. I was already choosing to do that. I had completely deprioritized my academic work. But so I was protesting all the time. And then May 2021 rolls around, which was sort of the last flare up in Gaza and Israel. And I'm Jewish and a Zionist for whatever people want to make of that word. And so almost overnight, all of these groups that I'm protesting with, now they're bringing signs that say Zionism is racism. End Israeli genocide. And so I have this major identity crisis. At first I'm trying to really convince these people, like, there's a misunderstanding here. There's something you guys aren't getting. I'm a good person just like you. Hear me out. Guys, we agree on everything else. Hear me out.
That must have been devastating.
it was devastating. It was completely shattering. I mean, and I was really trying to make it work, to hold these two things together. And I remember being on the phone with like one of the older women from the Refuse Fascism group that I was a part of. And she just said to me, like, straight up, like, do you support the murder of Palestinian babies? And I was just like, no. Like, what kind of, I can't even believe you're asking me that. Like, where is the good faith? Like, I'm a person that's been out there on the streets with you 2 times a week for the last year. You know nothing about my morals and my character. It was shattering.
Can I ask, did you ever have a moment where you said, maybe I have it wrong on Israel-Palestine? Because it seems like out of, let's say, 100 topics, you agree on 99.
99.
And there's this one. So I presume, I mean, you don't have to share too much, but I presume that maybe your perspective on Israel-Palestine was like deeply rooted in a well flushed out perspective or something. Like, why didn't you question your perspective on this?
So I had questioned it earlier, years before, because I knew it was already evident. Again, I was in these super progressive radical spaces. It was already very evident that Zionism was a no-no. And so I didn't advertise myself as a Zionist, but I would sometimes talk to someone one-on-one. If they said something that I felt like they had a misunderstanding, I would say, actually, Zionism just means this, or, I would try to educate people. But I went through this process of questioning myself, right? Is Israel the bad guy? Am I getting this wrong? Have I been lied to? Before this breakdown happened. And I landed on no, basically. And in fact, it was my self-assuredness in my sort of Jewish identity, and just I knew that I knew so much more than these people.
I know that.
I just literally did. Like, I just actually knew so much more of the history, things that these people, they weren't even trying to hide it. They didn't know anything about any of the history. They're tuning into like what's on the news and what's on social media right now.
Well, it's a bit like gender. Like, you're talking to people and they make up words and they don't even know what they're talking about. And you're like, oh my God. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so I actually kind of credit my strong and rooted identity as a Jew and a Zionist as what allowed me to take a step back. Because like you said, otherwise I would have just said, oh, I'm wrong. If everyone that I love and believe in and agree with says this thing, maybe I'm wrong. And I still, to this day, I search for evidence, especially with Israel, that would contradict my conclusion, because even if just for the reason that I want to be able to competently talk about these things, like I don't want to be covering up ugly truths. In fact, I think the history, again, not to get too much into Israel and Palestine, but the history of Israel and Palestine is very ugly. It's not pretty. There is no side that comes out as being the innocent victim. But I was willing to really lean into the nuance there in ways that other people simply were not.
Yeah.
And so basically I get kind of pushed out of, at the same time, I get pushed out of these activist circles, and I'm no longer in graduate school because I'm on this leave of absence. So I have this sudden sort of separation, physical distance from the people who are so wrapped up in this the way that I used to be wrapped up in it. Mm-hmm. So I do credit to a certain extent just the distance. And frankly, this actually reminds me of a lot of the sort of ROGD stuff, where when you can get these kids out of their environment, out of their highly politicized environment, they come back to themselves.
Yep.
So that, I think, was certainly part of it for me. But basically the conscious aspect of this for me was, wow, if my side can get this so wrong, this thing that I know so much about, that if they're getting this so wrong, what else are they getting wrong? Mm-hmm. And so I then went down, kind of similar to what you were saying, Sasha. I then went down, I sort of see it as like 3 pillars in my mind of the big kind of my closely held political beliefs that I started to very secretly, very privately challenge.
Yeah.
Very secretly. Again, I was suddenly in the closet all over again. But so the first one was race, basically, and part of this was because everyone was calling me a racist for being a Zionist. And I'm just like, I don't think we're using that word correctly, I don't think that actually makes sense. And so the first kind of pillar that I challenged was sort of like, systemic racism is everywhere and white people are born racist. And so I was able to kind of flip that one over first. The next one that felt a little harder to challenge was some of the feminism stuff. And like, do we live in this insane patriarchy where women's work is not valued in the... And so I kind of, challenged that. My process of doing this for the most part was watching debates. So I was watching a lot of Intelligence Squared debates on my own time, again, in private. Because all I had, when you're so deep on the left, you never hear good arguments from the right. And I'm sure vice versa. You only hear the crappiest arguments that are the easiest to beat down.
Yes.
So I was like, let me listen to the best arguments against these things. And then, at the very least, then I'll know how to combat it better. If you understand the enemy, you're a more effective soldier. But actually what I found was that for a lot of these topics, at least, after watching it, I changed my mind.
Yeah, wow. It's remarkable.
I incorporated new information and changed my mind.
And did your wife know it?
Oh, sorry.
So scared. And my wife knew that I was going... She knew that I was going through the race stuff and then the feminism stuff. And she was there. She agreed. We went through that to a certain extent together. My wife is very also like defensive of the Jewish people, So she was, she was there, not literally watching the debates with me, but I'm a very chatty person, right? So I'd be talking about all these things on my mind to her, not to anyone else, not to any of our friends, nothing like that, but to her, yes. So we were kind of going on that part of the journey together. And then the last pillar that I looked at was gender. And that by far felt the scariest to look at because that felt, it felt too close to home. We're gay, we're lesbians, we're queer, right? Like this feels bigoted to look at. This makes me a bad person to think.
Yeah.
And, I'm like, my wife is like identifying as trans.
Yeah.
So this part, I did not go through with her.
Wow.
I don't remember exactly if I actually tried to think about it. I think what came first was Katie Herzog. So I had been listening to Barry Weiss's, this is however many years ago now, 3 years ago now, I'd been listening to Barry Weiss's new podcast. And Katie Herzog was like a weekly co-host of this segment with Nellie Bowles, with Barry Weiss's wife.
And
I'm like, wow, this lesbian is hilarious, she co-hosts this other podcast, Blocked and Reported. Let me check that out, That's kind of cool. That's kind of edgy, I'm now feeling a little transgressive, right? Because I'm going counterculture.
That's your natural place to be. I just want to point out, you're a transgressor. So this is actually...
Which I have to watch out for a little bit.
I know. I actually get that. But it's like, as the culture becomes like too... queer power and woke, you're like, ooh, there's a part of me, this yin yang dot inside of my social justice activism that like wants to grow. Like I really see that, and I actually relate to that, and I always have to be careful. And it was, Stella and I even talk about that. Like I always want to try to walk this fine middle ground and not get too whatever.
Totally.
Okay. So this feels transgressive, but there's a part of
now you're just going into being
empowered.
Being aggressive rather than transgressive.
Aggressive.
For dropping the trans. Yeah, exactly. So I start listening to Blocked and Reported, and I find out that and so I love this show, right? Because Katie's a lesbian and Jesse's a Jew. And I'm like, wow, they've got my whole identity here, and I really like their irreverent humor, and like this is a cool podcast. I'm really enjoying this. And then I find out, why do they call themselves Blocked and Reported? Well, because both of these people got into a lot of trouble in the gender world for asking questions about youth gender medicine. Yeah. So I credit Katie, frankly, for allowing me. She gave me permission to look at this, because Katie's not a bigot. She's a lesbian. She's a liberal. And she's saying out loud, hey guys, maybe this gender ideology is actually super regressive. How did we get from boys should be able to dress however they want and girls should be able to dress however they want and do whatever they want and be with whoever they want? How did we go from there to, if you are really into stereotypically opposite sex things, then maybe you actually are the opposite sex. Yeah. And so I really feel like Katie gave me permission to start asking these questions, and that just really sparked my interest. So I started listening to Gender Wider Lens.
What did you?
What's
I read
that?
Abigail.
Is it any good?
Yeah, let me get to that in a second. I read Abigail Schreier's book, which was the scariest thing for me to ever read.
I bet.
Wow.
Because Abigail's style is very no nonsense. Like, she's not sugarcoating it, but she's also very sympathetic. She's a very warm person, you can kind of tell. She cares about the people, but she's not sugarcoating it. She's not trying to flatter. So that was extremely difficult for me to read.
Can I ask, most queer activists know about Abigail Schreier, but haven't really read her book, or let's say even if they do, they've read it from a certain lens. So did you already know who she was? And
no.
then you had no idea. Okay.
I had no idea, but I also read it closer to a couple of years ago now. So like, I don't know how widely known her name was at that point, but no, I didn't know who she was. I had no priors about her.
Okay. Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was watching Wider Lens, and not to blow steam up of you guys' skirts here, but
how do you know we're wearing skirts? Isn't that a bit heteronormative of you?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't stop her. She's going to blow steam of her skirts.
Okay, yeah. Keep blowing the steam.
Yeah. This show was everything for me. I mean, wow. I ate it up like candy. I started from episode 1, and I went sequentially through every episode. And I thought not only that you guys were, brilliant and really touching on some important things here, but again, you guys gave me permission to talk about these things, because you guys are these very, very obviously thoughtful, empathetic therapists. You guys are not, this was not, I think I had been, when I first was getting, there's a real draw, I think, for women to get pulled into the radical feminist, gender critical lens, for lack of better words.
Yeah.
It kind of hits at some of our like base instincts as women when you can frame it as like, the reason this matters is because women's spaces and privacy and things are under threat. And so that's very emotionally compelling.
The very attractive victim narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It
is. No, yeah, Stella, you're totally right. It really is. You're totally right. And so you guys weren't doing that. And I needed that, especially coming right out of my clinical psychology program, where I was a therapist. I mean, I was working under the license of my, supervisors, but I was working, I was working as a therapist for years. And so seeing you guys talk about this really, really, really gave me permission to think these things and to challenge these things. The Pioneers series, I mean, rocked my world.
Wow.
It was so, so, so powerful and incredible to hear, from the horse's mouth of many of these people. Incredible to kind of understand the history a little bit better through the narrative of these people who were there. And then, of course, your episode with the the Dutch researchers really shook me and immediately reminded me of the fact that this issue of misusing measurements, misusing scales is actually really pervasive in the field. It's actually a big problem. And I can touch on that. I will. I'll elaborate just ever so slightly. You guys masterfully point out that when they switch this gender dysphoria scale afterwards and give people the scale that applies to the opposite sex, there are issues with this for a million reasons. Number one, they are not the opposite sex, right? Yeah. So these questions literally don't apply to their anatomy in the same way. Mm-hmm. And number two, you're actually asking, you would be expecting, I don't know how to frame this entirely, how I mean to say it, but you would actually be eliciting different types of responses. You're not even really asking the same question if you ask how they feel in the opposite sex body, right? Yeah, right. So you're not even getting at the same construct here. Mm-hmm. And I realized like this is something that happens in psych research all the time. And basically you're not allowed, not that you're not allowed to, if you just make up a measure, if you create items in a questionnaire that you think is really going to get at assessing this construct that you're studying, you won't be cited because your psychometrics aren't validated. People need to use other measures that have already been used and cited in order to bring validity to their study. So what a lot of people do is they adapt these measures. Yeah. And all you need to do to adapt a measure is to explain why you're adapting it. And this is just pervasive. I mean, I remember doing this too when I was doing research even younger, because I was doing psych research like back in high school. There was like a psych research program in my high school that I was involved in. And yeah, I mean, you do it all the time. If there's a parenting scale that really that you want to use, but they only have it for mothers. And so we add fathers and we write our little rationale in the paper. We added this because we wanted to assess this. But we don't know if these questions are going to be equally applicable for fathers. Right. You know, we make so much assumptions in the way that we adapt these scales. And that became so red alarm blaring to me during that episode. So yeah, all that to say, your podcast was extremely, extremely helpful, especially helpful in when I kind of realized that I need to walk my wife back from this. Okay. Because you guys had been spending time talking about parents, especially, but kind of how parents can walk this do this delicate dance with their kids. Mm-hmm. And you guys emphasize so much how important it is to not push them away. Mm-hmm. And how easy it might be to push them away, you know, because they're so kind of triggered.
And at this point, was she fully, trans-identified? Was she socially transitioned? Was she planning to medicalize? Had she medicalized?
So this was when it was getting scarier for me too, because my normie wife, who was not online and was not an activist at all, she was now suddenly bringing up to me this bigot named Lisa Lippman, who is publishing this bunk research that was based on she only got the data from transphobic parents, and I was just like, oh my God. My wife never talked like this. Frightening. Yeah. Because she's starting now to listen to podcasts. You know, she's doing what I'm doing, but on very different tracks, right? Like we're listening to very different podcasts, basically. Yeah. And so I'm just like, holy shit. Sorry to curse. It's okay. But yeah, so I'm like, how do I challenge her on this without it feeling like a challenge? You know, without sort of pushing her away. And so I kind of, I leaned a lot on what you guys, the sort of advice that you guys were giving to parents, the way that you guys were conceptualizing how to have these conversations and how to present information to these young people. And then I sort of had to adapt it a little bit, right? Because my wife is not 14. She's in her mid-30s. She's older than me,
Yeah.
right? She's in her mid-30s. And she's my wife, not my kid, right? So the dynamic is different there. But I also was really kind of what I remember really leaning on was from my psychology education in studying extreme behaviors, including like starvation and, you know, like drug use and even people who like sort of extreme, like really extreme sports people, you know?
Yeah.
How you sort of deal. And I suddenly now saw trans as an extreme behavior.
Wow.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
wanting to change your body, right? That's pretty extreme. And especially so many people who are going through this process so quickly. And so what I kind of remember, I'd worked at an eating disorder clinic when I was a therapist, and I really loved that work. I found it like just really, really rewarding, really rich. And I remember my supervisor at that clinic, who was just this like wonderful, revered kind of head of her field woman, published, a really accomplished clinician. She basically said sort of like there's a certain kind of really smart client, basically, for whom like the best way to get them out of this is to highlight for them how their behavior and their actions are not lining up with who they see themselves as, like the values that they. So if you have, you know, a client who's a researcher, who's a scientist, who fancies themselves a skeptic in so many ways, right? Who is engaging in all of this extreme, unhealthy, self-destructive behavior. You can say, no, this is bad. Or you can try to highlight to them how this doesn't line up with how they see themselves, with what they sort of purport to value. And so that was sort of the route I took with my wife. My wife is a science-oriented person. I remember, like, you know, she kind of poo-poos spiritual thing. Like, I remember one time I was watching like a Netflix show with like mediums and stuff like that. And like, do I believe it all? No, but like I like it. You know, sometimes I'm like, oh wow, that seems too spot on to be fake, right? And so I'm just kind of enjoying it. But she comes in and is just, you know, like, that's ridiculous, you know, very poo-poo. That's obvious. There's no science behind this. Is ridiculous, you know? And so I kind of tried to leverage that part of her to show her what was going on here. If I'm honest, though, let me back up a little bit. Part of walking her back from this was I took her phone and took her pronouns out of her bio. I just started doing things. I stopped using her pronouns.
Wait, you took her phone and took her pronouns. How did you do that?
You know, like on Instagram, people will have like their... But
what did she think when you did that?
She didn't know I did it. In fact, she brought it up to me and was like, oh, like, so weird. The pronouns are out of my bio. And I'm like, oh, so weird. That is so weird. I wonder.
She's a Elon Musk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she really is. She really is.
Babe, you're not going to believe what happened today.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh, that is so weird. Yeah, so what I also started doing is I would play her parts of your podcast and Blocked and Reported, really, in the most calculated way. I mean, again, in hindsight, it's like it was a little ridiculous what I was doing.
And is there anything you would recommend to people that, like you said, got her?
Well, I think, again, like you have to present these people with the information in a way that's not going to feel threatening. Yeah. So I knew that if I sent her, listen to this episode, listen to this thing, she wasn't going to do it. So instead what I did, and again, this is sort of sneaky, and so I don't know if I'm endorsing this, although I am endorsing it. It was very helpful, frankly. I would be listening to your podcasts and get to these parts that are like, oh God, she needs to hear this. And then I would buffer it to that point in the episode and press play right when she would get in the car.
I've done this to my husband with random things.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, not about gender, but that's very interesting.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and because it was very normal for me to listen to podcasts in the car, like that wouldn't have been abnormal. But so I would
line it up.
Choreograph, exactly. I would literally line it up to exactly where I wanted her to listen.
Wow.
And press play and just, have it. We're driving, just kind of have it on, right? Have it come from somebody else too. I think that can sometimes be important, right? Not coming from, especially in the parent-child, right? No, they don't want to listen to their mom tell them this, but maybe they can hear it coming from someone else.
This is such a fascinating conversation. Listeners often tell us they feel frustrated by the lack of nuance around this issue, and they feel afraid to speak their minds.
And they ask us how they can help to bring more clarity to this difficult topic at their workplace, in their kids' schools, or with their own friends and family. Well, here are 3 things you can do right now.
1. Follow. Wherever you're listening to this, take a second to click like, follow, or subscribe.
2. Share. Send this podcast to anyone who you think might appreciate it.
3. Join. Support our efforts by becoming a paid Substack supporter. Go to widerlenspod.com now to subscribe.
Now back to the discussion.
What
started to... tell us.
Go on, yes, Phil.
I think there are 2 things that really shook her out of this.
Okay.
One of them was more personal to her, and one of them was more about what's happening with gender medicine. So, with regards to the trying to highlight her value as someone who's very evidence-based, right? And not into the foo-foo, I'm born with the soul of the opposite. I mean, that should have been the first red flag, right? But no, it wasn't. While she was talking about this bigot named Lisa Littman, we also got into a argument over puberty blockers. Because again, she's listening to all this propaganda now, basically, of there are places that are trying to prevent trans youth from getting their life-saving care, the puberty blockers. And I was just saying, again, I was very conscious to not be too argumentative, to not raise my voice, to not even let it get into a fight. If we were going to disagree too much, to basically change the subject, because what you guys highlighted and what I know is true is you need to keep the relationship there.
Yeah.
You need to keep the goodwill between you. And if every conversation you have is a fight and is a stress,
right,
you're gonna the bond. You need the bond to be maintained in order to have any chance of getting through.
That's right.
So it was very delicate in how I wanted to approach it, but she was basically talking about this, and I was just like, well, puberty blockers, these are the same drugs that they castrate sex offenders with. These aren't, and she was just like, no, they're not. And I'm like,
wow,
no, they are. You should just look it up. There's actually some research on it, right? Because these are also the same drug. She's saying, no, these drugs are used in cis kids. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's true. Their approved clinical application is for kids with precocious puberty. I said, but the kids who are the trans kids who are taking it don't have precocious puberty. And when I learned and fully understood the process that if a child gets puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2 and then goes on to cross-sex hormones, their genitals don't develop, their sex organs don't develop. So they are sterile. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have just sterilized that human being if you successfully block the puberty at a young enough age. And so it was ultimately that fact that really kind of woke her up, but but she didn't take that information the first time it was presented to her, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
It needed to enter a few times without a fight any of the times. But it needed to enter a few times. And then she finally did. I remember it was Valentine's Day, probably Valentine's Day 2022 to me is when she fully came back from this, and she was fully like, she was now a gender critical, was this our Valentine's Day dinner 2 years ago. And maybe a little liquid courage helped also, frankly.
Yeah, totally.
And we were like it was a weird setting to have such a serious conversation, but it also was a loving setting. So like there was no tension. So we kind of could just talk, Yeah. And that's when it really got across to her. It sunk in for her that kids are being sterilized, that we don't know anything about these treatments long term because we've just started doing this, basically, especially on children. And that kid, and then suddenly it's so funny, right? How someone can be believing all this stuff and never thinking about it. Suddenly now, February 2022, she's going, but we don't even let kids get tattoos. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I know that exactly. There's madness.
You're in then. Like once they say that, it's done.
Exactly. Once they come to that on their own.
Yeah.
And so that was the sort of cultural aspect that I think really brought her on to our side, the gender critical side, let her leave the trans cult, for lack of better terms. But the individual aspect that I think had the biggest impact on her was, I remember she and I having a conversation, and it wasn't it was tense, but it wasn't horrible, but it was definitely tense. As she's starting to develop the anxiety that all of these people do of now misgendering, right? Yeah. Suddenly you've attached new pronouns onto yourself, and now suddenly being identified as your sex feels even worse than it did before. Yeah. And again, it always felt kind of bad to her. My wife really, truly has had lifelong severe sex dysphoria. Okay. But now she's added in this mental component, right? I mean, this. So I remember having a conversation with her. I don't know exactly what I said, but it was just sort of like, but you are a female.
Wow.
You are a female. And so people are gonna see you that way. Mm-hmm. And what kind of life is it to have an emotional, like to get so upset every time someone just sees you accurately?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that really, that hurt her.
Yeah.
That hurt her because she doesn't want to be seen as female. She never has wanted to be seen as female. But I think that also really set in for her this idea of like, sort of true, like why, how much do I want to fight? And how healthy is it? Like I said, to be paranoid sort of all the time. Are people seeing me? And it was hard too, because she was experiencing the gender euphoria when people would correctly pronoun her. And she would tell me that. I remember her saying, she was like, in the kitchen earlier today, like, Jason used my pronouns, like it felt so good. I'm just like, and that's probably when I took the pronouns out of her bio, to be honest with you. But there was just this hard, really challenging conversation where I decided that I need to be loving but honest, which is, again, but you are a female.
Yeah.
You will always be a female. And there's going to be most of the population, frankly, is going to see you that way.
Yeah. What's so remarkable about this story, first of all, there's a couple things. Number one, just how quickly her whole worldview could get turned upside down.
Mm-hmm.
how the underlying distress that predated the gender identity thing never gets resolved. The gender identity stuff and the binders and all, it does not actually help resolve the real question, which is, you know, maybe I have some shame about my sexual lifestyle. Maybe I feel uncomfortable with feminine aspects of my body. Maybe it's hard to be a masculine-ish woman. There's so many real things that get totally glossed over with this superficial treatment of the gender distress. And it's just, I don't know. What thoughts do you have about that? It's just remarkable. It's just so unfortunate because people really are well-intentioned. I want people to feel better and I want people to feel authentic and blah, blah, blah. But all the real distress never gets addressed because you can't, of course, become a male. It's not possible.
Exactly. And that feels the most obvious when we look at trans people who have transitioned, who, from what I can tell, are truly happy, healthy, and living authentic lives, are the transsexuals who will readily announce their sex. You know what I mean? It's the people who have no qualms about the fact that they are female or male, right? It's the people who are trying to convince themselves that seem to be in the most distress. And like you're saying, this gender dysphoria, this sex dysphoria was real and pervasive for my wife. Yeah. But trying to convince yourself that you really are a man didn't make it go away.
Right.
If anything, it highlights all the ways in which people aren't seeing you as a man.
Yeah.
Listen, part of like what I'm interested in doing now and some of the things that I'm exploring now are looking into gender dysphoria more, because there's also the reality that my wife's gender dysphoria didn't go away. So, you know, we see the sort of Rajdees, and we know for some of them what they were interpreting as gender dysphoria was other distress, right? And they're sort of like reaching into the symptom pool and pulling out gender dysphoria and trans from that. And so for some of these people, their gender distress goes away when they come out of the ideology, right? My wife came out of the ideology. She was now more comfortable than ever, frankly, as being like recognizing the reality of her sex.
Well, that's good.
She didn't suddenly become, and she didn't suddenly become feminine at all. Like, you know, none of these things happened.
Was she always a butch lesbian? Is that her presentation?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, she definitely like took it. She leaned into it more when she came out as trans. Like that's when she like cut her hair short, you know, which I was really nervous about her doing. And like, looks amazing. She looks awesome with, you know, with short hair. But yeah, this has always been correct. She's dated women her entire adult life, and she's always preferred to present more masculine and sort of do things. Her job interests and stuff like that tended to be more masculine.
Well, maybe when we move into the extended conversation, we can talk about what happens when you come out of the belief system, but you still have the gender dysphoria, because I actually think this is really important. And, you know, even these labels, as we've touched on a little bit, describing Ian hacking and the semantics, ROGD versus this thing versus that thing, they all have benefits and risks to using them. So ROGD can become its own thing, a runaway train that like doesn't fully encompass everybody's experience. So I'm glad that we talked about that a little bit today. As we wrap up this portion of the conversation, is there anything else you want the general listeners to know? And then we'll talk a little bit more about this like remaining gender dysphoria.
Is there anything else that I want the general listeners to know?
In 30 seconds or less.
I think it's too open-ended. I can't think of anything.
That's fair.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. No, it's been super interesting. Yeah. And are you still in psychology? Let's ask that. I know you didn't complete the program because you found it to be too social justice activist-y, I suppose, right? What happened with that?
That wasn't why I left, really.
Okay.
again, I came out of my social justice mindset after I had left, but that wasn't why I left.
Okay.
No, I'm not in psychology
justice
anymore.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
I
I'm
always don't want to accidentally make it sound like we hate justice.
No, I'm now anti-social and anti-justice. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
My wife and I, we own a business. We both of us kind of left the jobs and school that we were doing before to start our business. That is
Nice.
wonderful and gratifying to both of us. It was really something that maybe I do want to mention that is not on the gender thing, but leaving school, I think, is really, 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 really hard.
Yeah.
I felt really ashamed of leaving school. I felt like a failure, both to the people around me and to myself. It felt like I had to admit that I couldn't do it, which, how true is that? I don't know. I wasn't kicked out, but it was really, really, really hard for me to admit that I'm gonna leave. I'm done. I took a leave of absence, which was like, I'm going back, and then I took a COVID leave of absence, which was given as like a freebie. So each grad student gets 1 year leave of absence that you can take at any time that won't impact your standing. Yeah. And then when COVID hit, people were given a COVID one too. So I took my COVID one, and then right after the COVID one, I took my regular leave of absence because I was still not ready to go back. But for about 2 years, I was kind of saying, I'm going back. I'm going to be going back right after this leave of absence is done. And it was really, really, really hard for me to feel confident in leaving.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Not that everyone should just quit something when it gets hard or when they don't like it, but sometimes it can be really hard to quit something that maybe you should.
I'm glad you just said that, just to finish, just navigating that uncertainty of trying to kind of find your career and find your place and not look like a flake, and you're very serious and you want to make a difference. And I can see how you'd kind of almost project into activism because you're like, I'm a serious person, but I'm feeling uncertain. And I think we can career from career to career in our 20s, and we can flail a little bit. And I think it's a really frightening time that never really happened in other generations because you were kind of often prisoned into something, if you follow me. But this kind of destabilizing kind of moving here, there and everywhere is actually very anxious making, and it's a frightening time. And I think I don't envy them when I meet them, because I meet them in my work, and I just think it's not easy. It's not an easy position. But thank you very much for that extraordinary insight into...
Thank you.
Yeah, into where you came from and what it was like when you were there, because I think it'll be really, really interesting for our listeners. Dying to watch the comments on this one.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I hope so. And a lot of the reason that I wanted to come on here, but also that I've done some other interviews and stuff on smaller channels, is I want to give people permission in the same way that, Katie gave me permission. I know that it's important for me as a gay woman, to be saying these things, because it's much harder for people to slap the bigot label on me. So I feel a responsibility to talk about this. Plus, I'm obviously super interested in it. I don't want to say like that, I'm not just doing this for the goodness of, for other people. I'm super into all of this stuff, but I really do feel a sense of responsibility. And I want to give other people permission to know that you're not a bad person for having these thoughts. And it's okay to question them. And it's okay to change your mind. It is, in fact, it's good. It's a sign of being actually a sort of intelligent and thoughtful person is when you encounter new information, you incorporate it into your worldview.
You can have the courage to change your convictions.
Yeah,
yes,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank
if
you
anyone
so much,
wants
Talia.
to hear Tali continue to kind of flesh out gender dysphoria, please join us in the extended conversation. But I guess for now and for here, we'll say thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, a Wider Lens.
If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
And be sure to visit us on Substack by going to widerlenspod.com. There you can join our listener community, access bonus content and resources, plus learn about additional ways to support the show.
Our discussions are for educational purposes and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.